Imagine a single phone call that could rewrite global alliances. A call so unexpected, it silenced an entire room of leaders. A call from one of the world's most powerful men to a rising African star. This is a shocking moment when China's President Xi Jinping personally invited Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, the Lion of Africa, to Beijing, a move that would stun the world and secure 100 fighter jets in a single visit. Ibrahim Traoré just accomplished something that most African leaders only dream of. He secured 100 J-35A fighter jets from China in a single diplomatic visit. But here's what makes this deal absolutely shocking. The room was heavy with silence. Ministers and advisors exchanged glances as President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso reviewed a classified document. The clock ticked steadily, and the air was thick with anticipation. Then, abruptly, a sharp ring sliced through the stillness. It was his private phone, reserved for the most critical calls. Traoré raised an eyebrow. The number on the screen wasn't familiar. It showed a direct line from Beijing. The room tensed. Traoré answered. On the other end was a calm but unmistakably commanding voice. President Traoré, this is Xi Jinping. The room froze. Traoré rose from his seat and walked toward the window. Phone pressed his ear. Xi's voice, cordial but clear, extended a personal invitation to visit China. Not just a diplomatic gesture, but something more. We want to show you our army, share a meal with you, and speak as partners, he said. Traoré didn't respond immediately. The call was unexpected, the proposal weighty. There was more beneath the surface, a deeper intent. What did China see in Burkina Faso? In Traoré himself? As he hung up, his mind raced. This wasn't a ceremonial trip. This was the beginning of something far larger. The Lion of Africa had been called into the dragon's den. Traoré didn't hesitate for long. Within the hour, he informed his team, "We're going to Beijing." The Chinese president's invitation was a bold gesture, symbolic, strategic, and perhaps even historic. Burkina Faso wasn't a global superpower, but its stance in recent months had earned it international attention. Traoré, often dubbed Africa's Lion by his supporters, had taken a defiant stand against colonial legacies and foreign manipulation. His leadership integrity and unwavering confidence had caught the world's eye and now China's. The invitation was veiled in diplomacy, but spoke volumes. China was reaching out not to a subordinate, but to an equal. In private, Traoré knew what this meant. Global dynamics were shifting. Africa's voice was no longer to be overlooked. It was to be heard, respected, and welcomed. Within 48 hours, the arrangements were made. The delegation was prepared, and Traoré's flight was scheduled. What awaited him was unknown. But he understood this wasn't just about politics. It was about pride, presence, and power. And he was ready to represent not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. As the aircraft touched down in Beijing, the anticipation reached its peak. The runway was lined with Chinese officials, military personnel, and civilians. A red carpet was already rolled out. But what struck everyone first wasn't the protocol. It was the people. Thousands had gathered near the airport fences and sidewalks, waving Chinese and Burkinabe flags. Flowers flew through the air as the doors opened. Traoré emerged, dressed in a simple yet dignified traditional outfit, a calm but strong presence. The crowd erupted in cheers. Children chanted, "We love Africa," over and over. Another wave of voices followed. "We love Ibrahim Traoré." The moment was surreal. This wasn't just a reception, it was a declaration. As Traoré walked down the carpet, petals floated gently to the ground. Elderly Chinese veterans saluted him. Students screamed his name. Cameras flashed as if he were a rock star. Yet beneath the spectacle, there was sincerity. The people had embraced him, not out of obligation, but admiration. In a matter of minutes, a new bond had begun to form, not between two politicians, but between two peoples. The convoy began its slow, dignified journey into heart of Beijing. As the streets echoed with chants of unity, the presidential motorcade wove its way through Beijing, passing iconic landmarks until it finally pulled into the gates of Zongnanhai, the central headquarters of China's leadership. The courtyard was immaculate. a blend of imperial architecture and modern elegance. Xi Jinping stood waiting at the steps, surrounded by advisors. As Traoré stepped out, the two leaders approached one another and shook hands firmly, both smiling, both measured, both aware of the historic moment unfolding. The reception was warm, sincere, and deliberate. Over lunch, the conversation was friendly, laced with laughter and insight. They discussed culture, development, leadership values. Traoré spoke of Burkina Faso's agricultural strengths and the spirit of its people. She shared stories of his early days in the party, moments of struggle, and how unity had shaped China's rise. The atmosphere wasn't tense but easy, like old allies rediscovering common ground. As the plates were cleared, she turned to Traoré and said, "Tomorrow, we want you to speak to our people, to the world." Traoré nodded, understanding the gravity. This was more than ceremony. It was symbolism. A message was about to be delivered, and the whole world would hear it. Later that afternoon, the convoy moved out once more, this time toward a classified Chinese military facility just outside the city. The atmosphere shifted from ceremonial to tactical. Soldiers stood in perfect formation as the convoy approached. At the center of the base, a large platform had been prepared. She and Traoré stepped up together, greeted by senior military commanders. Traoré observed the soldiers, young, sharp, and disciplined. As they stood at attention, he asked to speak. With permission granted, he addressed them, not as a foreign guest, but as a fellow commander. "Discipline is your sword. Loyalty is your shield. Strength without wisdom is weakness," he said, his voice echoing across the training ground. He spoke of the shared struggles of soldiers, whether in Africa or Asia, the burden of duty, the price of peace, the honor of sacrifice. The Chinese troops listened intently. Then, breaking protocol slightly, several soldiers approached to shake his hand, their faces lit with admiration. Traoré's words had struck a chord. He had come not just as a politician, but as a warrior. And here, in the heart of one of the world's most powerful armies, he had earned their respect. The next morning, the city of Beijing buzzed with anticipation. Streets were decorated with banners, flags, and giant screens announcing a special address by President Ibrahim Traoré. The venue was a grand public square, outfitted with modern stage flanked by Chinese and Burkinabe flags. As the hour approached, tens of thousands of people filled the area. The atmosphere was electric. When Traoré arrived alongside Xi Jinping, the audience rose in a synchronized wave of applause. The crowd erupted once again in chants. "Lion of Africa, welcome to China." The phrase echoed through loudspeakers, rippling through the crowd like a tide. Traoré stepped up to the podium, composed and dignified. He began by thanking the Chinese people for their extraordinary welcome, then shifted into a deeper tone. "Africa is not a continent of pity. It is a continent of power, of promise, of people with dignity," he said. He spoke of Burkina Faso's journey from colonial shackles to sovereign strength. He praised China for seeing Africa not as a resource to be mined, but as a partner to be honored. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. He ended with a powerful promise. "The friendship forged here will echo for generations." The applause was thunderous. Following the speech, the two leaders retreated to private quarters within the presidential compound. Over tea and guarded conversation, they discussed strategy, real strategy, infrastructure projects, military technology, educational exchanges. Traoré was direct, and she was receptive. Unlike many Western interactions, this dialogue wasn't dominated by aid packages or paternalistic tones. This was mutual interest, mutual respect. She expressed admiration for how Traoré had unified his country during turbulent times. Traoré, in turn, praised China's ability to blend tradition with modernization. They spoke of the next century, not just in terms of power, but in the shaping of global narratives. For too long, Africa's story had been told by others. Now, with China at its side, it had a stage. The talks grew candid. She proposed a long-term military cooperation pact, which Traoré agreed to review. There was no pressure, only intent. The atmosphere was serious but collaborative. Trust was forming. They parted that evening with a sense of purpose, knowing the visit had moved beyond symbolism into substance. The stage had been set, the audience captivated. But now came the deals that would define futures. The following day brought a private dinner, less formal, more intimate. After dessert, Xi Jinping presented a small, velvet-covered box to Traoré. Inside was a graph hallucination, a rare $55 million masterpiece, the most expensive watch in the world. The gesture stunned the room. She stood and said, "This is a gift of time and of trust." Traoré accepted it with quiet grace. But that wasn't all. She then turned to him and said, "Burkina Faso has earned its place in history. We will supply 100 J-35A fighter jets to support your defense." The room was silent, then erupted in applause. Traoré was momentarily speechless. The gift was more than symbolic, it was strategic. It signified a pivot in global defense alliances. China had made a public declaration. Burkina Faso was not just a friend, but an ally. This was no longer diplomacy. It was a partnership rooted in shared values and mutual interests. As the evening ended, both leaders shared a quiet toast. No further words were needed. The moment had spoken for itself. A new axis was forming, and Africa stood at its center. The final morning of the visit arrived. The mood was warm, reflective. As the convoy approached the airport, Chinese citizens lined the streets one last time, waving flags and holding up signs that read, "Come back soon, President Traoré." The farewell ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Xi Jinping stood at the runway with military band behind him. They shook hands one final time, then embraced. "This is not the end," she said. "It's the beginning of something the world will remember." Traoré nodded, grateful, humbled, and determined. As he ascended the steps of his jet, he paused to wave. The crowd cheered once more. The plane took off, cutting to the clouds, carrying with a leader a new alliance and a message the world couldn't ignore. Back in Burkina Faso, crowds awaited him at the capital, already buzzing with news of his reception in China. But more than fanfare, they awaited what would come next. For Traoré, the journey wasn't just about a visit. It was about vision. And now, with the eyes of Africa and Asia upon him, he had the world's attention. Ibrahim Traoré's visit to China wasn't just a diplomatic tour. It was a turning point. It showed what the future could look like when mutual respect replaces manipulation and partnership replaces patronage. In a time when the global South seeks its voice, China extended its hand, and Africa, through Traoré, shook it firmly. The applause, the speeches, the flowers, and slogans, all of it pointed to something deeper, the hunger for new alliances based on equality and shared purpose. Xi Jinping didn't just host a foreign leader. He welcomed a movement. And Traoré didn't just accept gifts and gestures. He carved a place for Africa at the world's most powerful tables. As the jet disappeared into the horizon, one truth had become undeniable. The world is changing. And as it does, the Lion of Africa walks taller, stronger, and no longer alone. The day China welcomed Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just about one man. It was about millions. And history will remember it not as theater, but as transformation. Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories about injustice and comeback victories that will restore your faith in standing up for what's right.